Turn your Bibles to 1 Timothy chapter 3. 1 Timothy chapter 3 as we continue to deal with what is commonly referred to as the qualifications for the pastor. But as we saw in the last time, that this is more than just qualifications. There's a purpose behind what the pastor is to be doing, those that are in the office of the bishop to be doing these things, because it is very important that these things are in place so that the church can function as God intended it to function. So as we talked about all those things, it seems to be the idea of qualifications. We refer to the idea of blameless. Well, the idea of blameless isn't perfect again. It is the idea of this person understands the authority structures that he is involved in, whether he is the authority God-given or he is subject to an authority. If that person is not subject to the authorities, then they're not going to be blameless, and they're not going to be able to do the things that is being asked of him. So we talked about all those things. Now we get to verse 4. One that ruleth his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? Let's just stop right there. This implicates a tying in of these two things. If he cannot control his house, he cannot do what he's supposed to do of his household, how is he then going to be able to do that in the church? Which gives the idea that what is being required of him, the expectations of him in his home, is the same expectations being asked of him by God in the church. So as the father, as the husband in the home, he is the authority. And he is to expect that the things that take place in the house are going to be the biblical thing. The fact is the wife needs to be subject unto the husband. The children need to be subject unto, submissive unto the parents. So he then is going to have to do the same thing, the tying together. So let's look at this. One that ruleth his own house. The idea here of one that ruleth is the idea of presiding over. He is standing over. It kind of goes back to the idea of the beginning there. The idea of, we talked about last time, is the fact that he's going to be the overseer. He's going to be the inspector. He's going to be the one who's going to have to be identifying the things that are going on in the home, in the place that is there. If he's not paying attention, if he's not aware of what's going on in the home, then he's not going to be able to do the job. As the husband, as the father, if he's not aware of what's happening in his own home, then how is he going to be able to inspect and look and find those things that are not where they should be, and to be able to get them corrected, to get them where they need to be? It's important that he understands the role of being responsible in the home. Well, again, as we tie this in, he's then going to have that same role in dealing with the church. But let's look at it. The fact that he is to rule his own house, what does that mean? Well, he is to the next phrase, having his children in subjection with all gravity. Let's start with the fact that he's going to have his children, implying the fact that there are people in his home that, biblically speaking, are to be submissive to him, to be obedient. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. The children are to be in subjection. They are to be submissive. They're to be obedient to the parents. They're to be obedient to the father. So the implication there has to be someone there. Now, if he doesn't have any children, if there's nobody in the home, then there's not this illustration. But again, we talked about that last time. Does someone have to be married and have children in order to be able to have this in their life? Well, I don't think so. But I think we need to understand the truth of what he's trying to say. It's the principle here. It's the understanding that if you do have this in your life and you're able to conduct things the way they're supposed to be biblically, you are the authority in that home, and your children are in submissiveness, the wife is submissive, the home is right, then obviously you're then going to be able to have that ability to be able to carry that into the church. But it's the understanding of what is taking place here I think we miss so many times. Well, let's just start with the home. Let's start with the illustration. It is an illustration of what needs to take place. The children are to be in subjection. What does that mean? Well, the fact is it's just simple. They are the ones who are going to look to the authority. They are the ones that are going to say, look, I need instruction. I need to know what to do. I am not acting independently. I don't have the ability to sit there and say, I'm going to do what I want to do, and you have no say over that. You know, we have that in our homes. We have our children that sit there and say, I don't want to do that. They want to rebel. They don't want to, I don't want to take out the trash. I don't want to pick up my stuff in my room. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want to stop what I'm doing to do what you want me to do. Well, they have to be in subjection. They have to be submissive. So the idea is you're going to have the children understanding their role, which means they have to be taught that. Children do not naturally come into the home and sit there and say, yes, Mom, yes, Dad, we are obedient children. We'll do whatever you tell us to do. That's not natural. That's not normal. They have to be taught that. They have to be taught the fact that they have to learn to be obedient to the authorities over them. For what purpose? Well, the Bible talks about in Ephesians 6:1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. They are to be obedient because it's in the Lord's plan. It is the right thing to do. If they do not learn to be submissive to the authorities that they see with their eyes, how are they then going to be submissive to an authority that they do not see with their eyes, meaning God? Children are to learn how to be submissive for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is so that they can learn how to be submissive to God. It is God who put the parents in authority. So if I'm disobedient to my parents, then I am being disobedient to God. So the idea here is this person, this pastor, is a father, is a husband. He is teaching this to his children to be in subjection. And then it gives the phrase with all gravity. Now I've been studying this and talking this over and kind of looking at this. And a lot of times this phrase, that last part with all gravity, gets pushed back onto the person, him, the pastor, the dad, the father. And the fact that that person is to be doing this with all gravity. But as I began to study this and look at this, though that person should be in this position. Why? Because the word itself means the gravity means venerable, and that's not an English word we use a lot. But that word, if you look it up in most dictionaries, really gives the idea of commanding respect. Well, I think if you refer it back to the pastor, that should be important. I mean, he should be able to command respect. A father in the home should be able to command respect. But in the phraseology that's here, and the way it's written here, it really gives the idea that if you're teaching your children to be submissive, you're teaching your children to be obedient, so they understand the importance of being submissive to the authorities above them, you're going to teach them then with all gravity. They're going to be submissive with all gravity, which means the goal of the teaching here of the children is so that as you teach them and train them, they will reach that level in their life in which they reach that venerableness, that respect. That's the goal. You have children. You want to train them and teach them so that they have a good life, so that they find themselves in a good position in life, meaning they can command some respect. You don't raise your children to be hoodlums and disorderly people in the community. You don't teach them and train them so they can be disruptive to where nobody respects them and nobody looks to them for any answers. You want your children to grow up to where, hey, they're going to make an impact in life. So I think the phrase here is better understood as the fact that if he is to be that head of that home, in order to be able to say, hey, he's doing the right thing, he is teaching them to be submissive to the authority, so that with all gravity, the children will be with all gravity. In other words, they understand the importance of, look, you need to do what is right and submit yourself to authority so that you can then be in a position of respect. Let me tell you, those people who are in leadership because they've been given it for some reason, but have never learned to be good servants, never be able to come to that point where they are given respect. There may be positions of people who are bosses, but they may not have respect because they've not learned how to be submissive with all gravity. The disciples asked, who's going to be the greatest of all? And Jesus simply said, the servant. That one who is submissive to the authority. That one who is willing to say, yes, sir. That one who is willing to sit there and say, look, it's not about me. So what's the pastor's job? Well, the pastor's job, if you will, if he's in the home, the illustration is, if he has not learned how to teach his children this lesson, you have got to submit to authority. If you're going to make it in life, if you're going to be what you should be in life, if you're going to be able to that point where you're venerable, you have commanding respect of great age, you have impressive dignity and worthy of this title. If you're going to reach that, then you're going to need to learn to be submissive to the authority. That's why I say when it talks about being blameless, that pastor being blameless, he has got to understand the message of being submissive to the authorities. He has got to understand it is very important. He as a person is submissive to all the authorities that will be over him. And he needs to learn that is the most important job that he teach that. Because we've talked about this in Titus and first part of Timothy. If we have a breakdown of authority where you have people that are not going to be submitted to one authority or the other, then we are going to lose our walls of protection. Most, again, use that illustration of the umbrella of protection, but for the sake of the church illustration, we have walls of protection. If I'm obedient to those who are over me, then I have got some protection. But as soon as I sit there and say, you know what, I'm going to be obedient to anybody but this person, because I don't like that person, I don't like that person being in that position, we end up putting big, huge, gaping holes in our walls, and the world gets in. Why is the church falling apart? I believe that it's because we have bishops who don't understand the authority that they have, and they're not teaching it. And if they're not teaching it, it's not being learned, or vice versa, they're teaching it and it's not being followed. Again, let's talk about the home. This is used a lot of times where churches have come, well, pastor, your child is rebelling, so you no longer meet the qualifications of the pastor, you need to leave. Be careful, because follow what's going on here. Is he teaching this? Is he coming to his children and teaching it by not just by means of words, but he's living out in his life? Is he in a position where he is submissive to the authorities that are over him? Meaning, is he submissive to the government authorities? I mean, the Bible tells us those are authorities over them. Is he submissive to all those things in which he has to find himself, you know, I'm submissive to God. What does God want me to do? Is he submissive? Is he demonstrating that in his life? Well, if he is, then he's blameless. You can't sit there and say, well, he doesn't really, you know, he wants everybody to listen to him, but he doesn't listen to anybody else that is in authority over him. And who's the pastor's authorities? That's where the question. Some will sit there and say, well, he has to answer to us, the people. I'm sorry, find it in the Bible. Where do children have the authority to come to parents and say, look, I'm going to hold you accountable. You better listen to me because we're the children and you're the parents. You would never tolerate it in your home. You would never tolerate the fact that those who are supposed to be submissive to government sit there and say, wait a minute now, we don't like any of those rules. That's how the mob rules. You say, wait a minute, we live in a democratic society here, democracy. The voice of the people rule. Really? I believe the way the structure is set up in the United States is there is a constitutional republic, which means we have to abide by the law. We can't just sit there and say, as a group of people, we don't like the law, so we're just going to do whatever we want to do. It's not about the people. Our authority is the law. And we need to be submissive to that. So, where is it that we find those who are supposed to be the submissive ones telling those who are in authority what to do? Now, this gets controversial, I understand. But you want to know why the church is falling down? It's because we've reversed the roles. The children are the head of the home, and the people are the head of the church, and the people are the head of the government. And we've got a breakdown of authority, gaping holes. So you say, well, what if the pastor's children are rebellious? Is he dealing with them the right way? Is he dealing with them scripturally? Hey, if you're going to rebel, then here are the consequences of your actions. Even to the point of saying, look, I am going to remove them from the home. I am going to separate them out. You can no longer live under my roof if you are not going to be subject to my rules. Because it is very important that the authority structure doesn't break down. Now follow me on this, because this is where it is very crucial. If he's teaching his children this and they're rebellious, and he is willing to sit there and say, look, I'm going to separate these children from under my house because they're refusing to do what is right, that he has not lost control of his home. He is absolutely in control by sitting there saying, it is never acceptable for somebody in this home to rebel against the authority, because the authority is the one thing that is giving protection to this home. If you, as a child, want to step out from underneath that protection, then you have that right to do so, but understand, be prepared, you are no longer protected from the things of the world. You are no longer protected from Satan's attacks. If you would just simply be willing to submit to the authority, then you have all the protection in the world, because then the authority is the one who has to answer for all the problems. Look, I'm just simply doing what I've been told to do. As a child, I'm going to be obedient to my parents. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I'm just going to be submitted. If something goes wrong, it's not on me. You know what? That's exactly the right attitude. Look, I'm just being told, do what I'm told to do, because it's not on me. It's not my... God's not going to hold you responsible. In teaching children, I simply tell children, look, you sit there and say, parents have so many rules. I can't keep up all the rules. There's just too many rules. I don't like all the rules. I remind them and say, wait a minute. You've missed it. Children have one rule, and one rule only. The Bible, if you study the Bible, you will find that the children only have to be obedient to one rule. They do not have to worry about what Genesis says all the way to Revelation says. They don't have to worry about all that. They don't have to get all those things. It's real simple. They have one rule and one rule only. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. If they do that, then that's all they have to answer for. They are not going to stand before God and answer for anything else other than that. That's it. Now, let's tie this in. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church? So if he understands his role and how to take care of his home, and that is, he's going to teach them to be subject to the authority, and he's going to teach them such a way that they become with all gravity. They then will someday reach that level in which they have respect. People will be able to go to them for answers. People will sit there and say, hey, that person, boy, they turned out to be a great person. If that's the role that the father is supposed to play, and it's important that he understand that. Why? Because he then has to turn around and do the exact same thing in the church. What is the role of the pastor of the church? The same thing that we've just talked about. What do you mean? That means he has to be able to step into the church and say, I'm going to teach you how to be submissive to the authorities in your life. God has placed me as the pastor of this church and has given me that role of a bishop, an overseer, an inspector. That is the role God has placed me in. And the Bible says that we are to be submissive to the authorities that are over us, and that includes the pastor. And again, there's so many people right now who may be sitting there going, yeah, but what about this and this and this, and throwing everything they can possibly at me. Then I sit there and say, okay, then give your children the exact same opportunity. Let them throw everything that they can at you, and all your faults and all your mistakes, and all the way they don't like the way you're doing things. And you allow your children to treat you as you are treating the authority and that pastor. The pastor simply comes in and says, look, God has given me this authority, so I need to teach you to do what? Be submissive. Why? Because if we're not submissive to the authorities that we're under, we are going to break down our walls of protection. The world is going to get in, and the world is going to corrupt our teaching. The world is going to corrupt our thinking, and we are not going to be effective in the world, and we're not going to reach the world. We're not going to be able to reach the lost. Why? Because everybody has their own opinion on how things ought to be done, and everybody should have an equal say, and everybody should be able to do their own little thing. It's not Bible. It's wickedness. It's worldliness. It allows ungodly thinking to get in. You have got to be willing to submit the authority. And you've got to be able to sit there and say, you know what? I'm going to do this, and he needs to be able to teach this, and he needs to teach it with all gravity, which means his goal for the people in the church is that you would learn truths so that as you grow spiritually as a child, you will reach that point of venerableness. You will reach that point where the people will be able to respect you for your understanding and knowledge of the truth. That's his job. So, same as it is in his home, as in the church. If there's somebody in the church who sits there and says, I don't like it that way, I don't think it ought to be done that way, I'm not going to listen to pastor, and they're going to be behind the scenes, nip, 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 talking about this, not liking this, I don't want to do this, I'm not going to submit to this. Hey, who does he think he is? He's just a big dictator running things. You know what? If that person is rebellious, then the pastor's job, just like the father's job in the home, if he hasn't learned to do it in the home, he's not going to be able to do it in the church. He then has to have the understanding that it is vital for him to step in as a pastor and say that person needs to be removed from this church. Just as he had to do it with the rebellious child. If you are not going to be submissive to the authority here, I am not going to jeopardize our walls of protection to allow you to stay. You need to be removed. If a pastor is not willing to sit there and come to those in the church who are going after and not submitting to authority and sitting there saying, well, I would do it differently, and I just griping and griping and griping. If he's not willing to step in and sit there and say, you're not following the scriptures of what God wants this church to do, you are jeopardizing our ability to have a protection of the authorities that are in here. You need to leave. Well, that just doesn't happen. Then we wonder why it is that our church is in the position it's in. How is it that we've reached this level where our churches are falling apart? There's nothing but troubles and controversies. It's because possibly, you had a pastor who didn't learn how to do it in the home and not learning to do it in the church. So if you've got a pastor who has learned in the home and is doing it in the church and is sitting there saying, we are going to do this right, and if you're going to rebel, you're out, you shouldn't be criticizing that pastor. You shouldn't be attacking that pastor. You should be thanking God that you have a pastor who understands the importance. So with that in mind, that pastor cannot be a novice. He cannot be newly planted. That's what that Greek word is. Newly planted. You say, I need a shade tree to protect me from the sun. Well, you don't go there and say, you know what, that little twig of a tree that I just planted, I'm going to go lay down beside it. It's not going to help you any. It's newly planted. It doesn't have strong enough roots to protect you from the winds. It does not have strong enough and big enough branches to protect you from the sun. Don't get somebody who is not going to be able to know to stand, that is strong enough, who's been around long enough, who sits there and says, you know what, I know what is true, I know what is right, and you know what, when the hard times come, I am going to have to do my job, as hard as it is, as a parent, to discipline your children. You know you've got to do it because you're trying to teach them to be in subjection with all gravity. You're trying to get them, you know if you don't discipline them, they're not going to achieve in life what you want them to achieve. Pastors, if you're not willing to come in and discipline the church, if you're not willing, you don't have roots deep enough to be able to stand firm and says, I'm going to discipline the church so that they become subjective to authority, so that they understand that this is vital for their growth as a Christian. If they're not willing to do it, then that is either a novice or someone who just does not have the roots, or if you will, if we go back to the first message on this chapter, someone who really may have a desire to do the job, but has not been God called. And that's where we need to understand, if you have a pastor that is doing it, and as a pastor of a church, I'm going to sit there and say, you know what, right is right, we're going to do this, so don't put a novice. Why? Lest being lifted up with pride, he fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must have a good report of them which are without, lest he fall into the reproach and the snare of the devil. What is it talking about here? The fact is, you've got to have someone who understands the authority structure in the church, in the home, and yes, in his dealings with the world. He's got to understand this. He's got to have all this down, because if he doesn't get all this down, how is he going to lead the church? So if you have a pastor who is doing these things, who is sitting there saying, I'm going to stand for what is right, I'm going to do what's right, and I'm going to teach these people to learn to be submissive with all gravity, with a goal of being venerable, then he's not helping the church. If he allows people in the church to sit there and say, I'm not going to listen to you, if he gets to the point where he sits there and he goes to the church, what do you want me to do? You tell me. If he gets to the point where he comes to, and we're going to get to this in the next message, he gets to the point where he sits there and says, well, I have a deacon board that I answer to. Where do you get to that point where you sit there and say, I am going to, not teach them to be submissive, but I'm going to sit there and give up my role of authority and allow them to tell me what to do? We've got a problem. Again, may be controversial, may cause a lot of stink, but I'm going to tell you, this is what the Bible says. And if the Bible says it, then we need to learn to do those things. We need to learn to submit to those things. So I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you, study this, look at this, and say, where do I fit in this role? Pastors, where do I fit? If I'm going to be the one in authority, am I willing to do as I would do for my own family? Am I willing to do it for the church? If I'm a child in a home, am I willing to be obedient to my parents? If I'm someone in the church, am I willing to find myself, I'm going to submit to the authority of the pastor. And I'm going to trust God that God knows what He's doing. And I'm going to learn this. What a difference it'll make.